So where are we now, given the 5 factors that you outlined? Where is the United States, or even really the West, will include Europe, in this very familiar cycle of rise and fall?
The United States is the strongest power, which has been in relative decline. So we are at what I would call stage 5 in a 6-stage cycle. The 6th stage is when there's a breaking down of these orders. We're not there yet, but we are close to there and headed in that type of direction.
Goody, really looking forward to that. Well, President Donald Trump has just nominated a new chair for the Federal Reserve. And in order to understand whether this individual would, foster an economy favorable to working class Americans, I really do think it is worth hearing from Ray Dalio's recent discussion on monetary policy, because that's what the Fed deals with, monetary policy. Now, Dalio, who's a billionaire hedge fund manager, explains that the United States is on the brink of a real crisis. Take a look.
What does a breakdown look like? What does stage 6 look like?
Well, from the monetary point of view, it is that the demand for the reserve currency is not sufficient to meet the supply. You are seeing a movement by central banks and countries to hold gold as an alternative reserve currency, partially because of that supply-demand situation, and partially because they worry that there may be a payments problem.
So in other words, other countries perceive a risk in holding dollars because, well, for lots of reasons, but one of them is, like, if the United States government at the time doesn't like you, they can grab your dollars.
That's right.
So it's not worth it.
Right, and it's a risk that both the debtor and the creditor have to each other.
So in this portion of the discussion, Tucker and Dalio are talking about 2 different things that are relevant, right? So on one hand, they, in the very end there, they were discussing the US sanctioning a country that holds US dollars, and when that happens, they lose access to those US dollars. And so other countries on the international stage might be wary of holding US dollars, knowing that the US at any moment can just decide to sanction you and deprive you of those resources. There's another thing happening though at the same time. Now, when we talk about the US being in debt, what does that mean? Well, you have other countries or investors, for instance, buying US debt through treasury bonds. That's what treasury bonds are. So when you're buying US bonds, you're providing liquidity to the federal government, which it could then use for whatever reason. But the US is supposed to pay you back with interest, okay? So if you guys have been paying attention to some of the credit rating related news when it comes to the US economy, you'll notice that we've been dinged in the Moody's credit rating, for instance, and it's because of the volume of debt the United States has accumulated, over $38 trillion at this point. So that makes investors a little bit scared to buy US bonds, because they're worried that maybe we're getting to a point where the US can't be trusted to pay back, okay? So there's that fear as well. So you are seeing this trend now where various countries, various investors, instead of investing in the US dollar, they're investing in gold or silver, okay? That's been a big story. So when we talk about the Federal Reserve printing money, Dalio is about to outline exactly what we mean by that. So take a look.
The United States can feel vulnerable if they can't sell enough of those bonds to others, and if the demand isn't, because then interest rates would have to rise because of the supply demand, too much supply relative to demand.
To make it more appealing to buyers.
Yes, and also to cut the demand for credit. In other words,
Right.
if the price rise, then people will borrow less and so on. And that then has the effect of mechanically slowing down the economy. That produces that result, then what happens is then the central bank comes in and it prints money and it buys the debt, which depreciates the currency.
So if foreign countries don't want to buy your debt and your central bank decides we're going to print more money and buy our own debt with it, which is what we're doing, wouldn't the people doing that stop and say, wait a second, this sounds like an electric windmill. Like, what are we doing here? This sounds crazy.
They're stuck. They're stuck.
They're stuck. So the monetary policy that they're talking about is specifically referred to as quantitative easing. And quantitative easing is a Federal Reserve policy that was implemented on steroids following the 2008 economic crisis. So the balance sheet for the Federal Reserve really exploded during that time, and it distorted the market. So there are consequences when the Fed prints money, okay? Obviously, it devalues the dollar. And Dalio is about to explain that and more in this next clip. So just take a quick listen and understand how royally effed we are.
And then the central bank buys that. And then the central bank, now it owns all these treasuries. And then the central bank starts losing money because they own the treasuries. And then they're going up. So they have to produce the money and credit to keep that rate down, and they lose more and more money. And that dynamic then doesn't stop the change in the capital flows. That's why and then traditionally in all of these cases, you see a move to the hard money, the move to gold, okay, as we're seeing. You see that dynamic in terms of that move to gold. And then it starts to run its course. So it's very much like, think about what happened from 71 through the 70s, produces more stagflation.
You know that moment right before you launch something new, that pit in your stomach? I remember when I started TYT, I thought to myself, what if no one watches? What if we run out of money tomorrow? It was scary. Still think about that every once in a while, but you push through, and having the right tools makes all the difference. Like when we launched Shop TYT, Shopify was a lifesaver. We used it and we loved it. If you're starting a business, those what ifs can be terrifying, and that's where Shopify comes in. What if I can't build a good looking website? Shopify has hundreds of templates to build a beautiful online store that actually matches your brand. What if people haven't heard of my brand? Shopify helps you to get the word out with easy to run email and social campaigns. What if I get stuck or have a question in the process? Their award-winning 24/7 support is there with expert advice. And the best part, that iconic purple Shop Pay button. It's why Shopify has the best converting checkout on the planet. Less abandoned carts, more sales for you. It's time to turn those what ifs into with Shopify today. Sign up for your $1 per month trial today at shopify.com/TYT. Go to shopify.com/TYT. That's shopify.com/TYT.
And then at some point, the inflation problem or the devaluation of money problem becomes such that the central bank then tightens money,
Right.
and so on. And
The Volcker years.
The Volcker years, 1979, 80, 81, 82, right? So the pendulum swings.
So the pendulum swings. These cycles seem to be happening more frequently. And you have stagflation, the devaluation of the dollar, and then the tightening of credit. That's what we have to look forward to, especially if you're a working class American. This is not the type of cycle that you benefit from, I think, needless to say. So this discussion is relevant, super relevant to our current economic cycle, but it's also very relevant at this moment because of Trump's nomination of a new Federal Reserve chair, okay? So Kevin Warsh is his name. His last name is fun to say, Warsh, not Walsh, Warsh. And he was on the Fed board before. In fact, he was on the Fed board during the 2008 crisis. He served on the board from 2006 to 2011. Now, he supported the unprecedented money printing as the Fed's response to the credit crisis that resulted from the 2008 economic crash, okay? And that doubled the Federal Reserve's balance sheet. So in this next video, you are about to hear Warsh explain his rationale for flooding the system with liquidity by printing money.
You were on the Federal Reserve Board of Governors during the financial crisis of 2008, which led to the worst economic contraction since the Great Depression and unemployment in this country of 10%. Let me give you some sense of the magnitude of the Fed's action. Between the first and second quarter of 2008, the Fed's balance sheet, measure of the supply of reserves in the banking system, the balance sheet doubled in the space of a quarter from $1 trillion to $2 trillion. But first tell me why you supported that dramatic infusion of money into the markets in 2008.
The job of the central bank is to show up with all sorts of money, there's that dirty word again, and get those markets to function. Not to set prices, but to make sure that buyers and sellers could clear, and the central bank was there to provide liquidity when no one else would. It was an emergency.
Right.
So you're prepared to cross more lines than you would in benign times.
It was an emergency. Now, the interviewer there mentioned how the Federal Reserve's balance sheet increased from 1 trillion to 2 trillion. 2 trillion, whoa. Edwin is here on stage right now and it's just like, oh my God, it's a lot of money. You wanna know what the balance sheet for the Federal Reserve is today? $6.5 trillion. Yeah. So what is Warsh planning to do should he be confirmed as the next chair of the Federal Reserve? Well, interestingly enough, he is on the record saying that he's concerned about the Fed's balance sheet. He is worried about that $6.5 trillion. So he wants to do quantitative tightening, right? Quantitative easing is the policy that we've been discussing. Tightening means, you start decreasing your balance sheet from the 6.5 trillion. Okay, but here's the thing that's really interesting about him. He knows that that is going to spark a crisis. And his whole reasoning here is let the crisis happen. And when the crisis happens, that's when we come back in and do massive quantitative easing. That's what happened after 2008. And that happened to the detriment of ordinary Americans. Now, if you look at charts, you'll see that wealth inequality, that gap, really widened thanks to that policy. Because the haves, they've got the money to buy up assets on the cheap during that crisis. The rest of the American people suffer. And the Federal Reserve printing more money only devalues the dollar further. So this is a disaster of epic proportions. I don't know how to fix it. This is definitely not my expertise and it's above my pay grade. But I'm smart enough to understand how disastrous this is and how Warsh, based on what he claims he would do should he be confirmed as Fed chair, is gonna make the situation worse because he's just gonna repeat exactly what the Fed did after 2008. So that's how the game is played here. And make no mistake about it, the wealthy never miss an opportunity to take advantage of a financial crisis.
Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows.